Few events in America's industrial history have rattled the nation quite like Ford's bold new move. It's not just a shift in corporate planning, it's a seismic jolt that has everyone asking if this legendary automaker is betraying its homeland or simply evolving to survive. The whispers began as routine chatter about production lines and supply costs, but soon morphed into something far more explosive. Suddenly, news broke that Ford might uproot significant parts of its manufacturing from Michigan and move them beyond US borders. To some, it felt like a punch in the gut, a betrayal after more than a century of championing the American worker. Others argued it was inevitable if Ford hoped to remain competitive in an era dominated by electric vehicles and global trade wars. Whatever the truth, the fallout has been monumental, sending shockwaves through the halls of Congress, rally arenas, and boardrooms across the country. The question is clear and cuts to the core. Is this the dawn of a new age for Ford, or the end of an era for American manufacturing as we know it? For over 100 years, Ford stood as the proud emblem of American ingenuity and resilience. The brand's heritage is woven into the national identity, conjuring images of bustling factories and hardworking families fueling the growth of a great industrial power. Henry Ford's promise, to build cars everyone could afford, was more than a business goal. It was a social revolution. That Model T rolling off the assembly line wasn't just any car. It signified American dreams moving forward on four wheels. Through 2 world wars and countless economic booms and busts, Ford remained a mainstay of the country's industrial might. Entire cities sprang up around the company's factories, creating generational pride and stability for millions of workers. Union deals, pension plans, and lifelong careers at a single facility weren't just traditions, they were the bedrock of middle America. But times change, and even a mighty icon can't rest on its past forever. Around every corner, new technologies, consumer demands, and global forces kept pressuring Ford to adapt. All those decades of tradition might have provided the backbone of the brand, yet global competition doesn't spare even the most storied names. By the time rumors surfaced that Ford planned to shift major EV operations overseas, the shock was real. How could a company so intimately linked to the American way of life possibly uproot that legacy? Still, nostalgia alone doesn't pay the bills, nor does it keep factories modernized. Whether we consider Ford's move a betrayal or a savvy evolution, one thing is certain: this is the biggest test of loyalty and progress the automaker has faced in generations. And as emotions run high, the mechanics behind Ford's pivot remain shrouded in a swirl of questions. But those questions are about to get a lot more complicated. The core of this controversy isn't just about a single boardroom decision. It's about the relentless economic and political pressures slamming into American automakers. Over the last few years, the global push for cleaner energy has reached a fever pitch. Electric vehicles, once seen as niche products for early adopters, are now rolling out in massive numbers worldwide. Governments across Europe and Asia are setting aggressive deadlines to eliminate gas-powered cars, while major cities talk of banning traditional vehicles altogether. Meanwhile, rising tariffs on steel, aluminum, and the precious metals used in EV batteries have driven up costs for anyone attempting to keep production on US soil. Lithium, balt, nickel, these are the new gold mines, largely owned or processed in foreign markets where labor is often cheaper and regulations more flexible. It's a brutal reality. Every extra charge and import fees chips away at an automaker's profit margins, especially when contending with next-generation tech that's already expensive to develop. Adding fuel to the fire are global supply chain breakdowns. Natural disasters, sudden policy changes, and health crises around the world can shut down factories or delay shipments at the drop of a hat. In an environment where new car models are planned years in advance, any hiccup can snowball into major financial strain. For Ford, these pressures started piling up, each cost spike a silent alarm bell that perhaps the old way of doing business was no longer viable. It didn't help that new players like Tesla disrupted the status quo, mastering battery production and software integration with a lean global approach. While Ford poured billions into modernizing domestic plants, Tesla was busy locking down supply deals and courting overseas battery giants. The writing was on the wall: adapt or watch market share vanish. Still, no one expected Ford to pull the trigger on such a drastic move so suddenly, until they did. Inside Ford's leadership circles, debates raged for months, possibly years, before the public caught wind. On the one side were those who believed in Ford's American legacy, insisting that keeping production stateside was more than just good PR, it was a moral and patriotic obligation. On the other side were voices increasingly worried that clinging to tradition could wreck the company's future. The tension boiled down to survival. If Ford refused to adapt to global market conditions, it risked becoming a relic in a rapidly modernizing world. The cost discrepancies hit with brutal clarity. Building an EV in the United States didn't just mean paying higher wages. It meant absorbing tariffs on materials that ironically had to be imported anyway. Metals from Africa, lithium from South America, semiconductors from Asia. The final straw was the unpredictability of domestic policies. In an attempt to protect American jobs, certain administrations championed heavy tariffs, but that ended up placing companies like Ford at a competitive disadvantage compared to rivals operating in more open markets. Rumors swirled that senior executives spent sleepless nights running endless projections. Some scenarios showed Ford bleeding money if it insisted on building next-gen vehicles only in the US. Others showed the brand retreating from the EV race entirely if it couldn't match the speed of foreign assembly lines. The environment was tense, with no easy answers and no guarantee that whichever path they chose wouldn't lead to backlash. In the end, the decision was made: shift a substantial portion of Ford's electric vehicle production overseas. Factories in Wayne, Michigan, known for churning out lines like the Focus or the C-Max, would eventually see those responsibilities phased out and transferred elsewhere. Could that keep Ford afloat long term? Possibly. Would it spark a political firestorm the likes of which we haven't seen in decades? Absolutely. Once the plan leaked, it was only a matter of time before Donald Trump stepped up to the microphone. The moment reporters shouted questions about Ford's move, Trump wasted zero time crafting his rebuttal. He took the stage at a charged rally, eyes blazing, and lit into Ford with the kind of passion that electrified his bet. In no uncertain terms, he labeled the automaker's plan a deep betrayal. As he spoke, the crowd roared, echoing the sense of injustice that pulses through many American factory towns. If there was one thing that could reignite the flame of economic nationalism, it was a beloved US brand seemingly turning its back on the homeland. Trump's point was straightforward. American companies owe their success to the workers and communities who built them up. Ford, by taking production overseas, was ripping away jobs from families who counted on these factories for their livelihoods. He claimed it was a gut punch to the very electorate who had once been promised more employment, not less. Calls for punishment soon followed. The idea of slamming Ford with new tariffs or revoking government contracts immediately circulated among Trump's closest advisors. Social media lit up with hashtags calling for a boycott. In some corners of the country, this was taken as a full-throated rallying cry to defend American manufacturing by any means necessary. Still, Ford didn't flinch. They knew this reaction was coming and had prepared statements emphasizing the bigger picture: global EV demand, advanced battery research, the need to remain price competitive. But to many in Trump's orbit, those justifications reeked of corporate spin. From their viewpoint, the automaker had a duty to keep high-paying industrial jobs at home, and they saw any talk of globalization as pure betrayal. But Ford had a counterattack brewing, one meant to turn the tables on critics and refocus the conversation on the future of the entire automotive landscape. What surprised everyone wasn't just that Ford refused to back down, but that they doubled down. In a pointed press release, executives laid out the broader plan. This move overseas, they argued, was about remaining viable in the cutthroat world of electric vehicles, where costs needed to be controlled and supply chains needed to be flexible. They also stressed their ongoing commitment to American facilities, pointing to planned expansions in research and development. Far from abandoning the US, Ford insisted it was preparing for an even greater global fight, one in which the company had to be agile, innovative, and ruthlessly strategic. Unapologetically, Ford declared that without serious moves to cut production costs, it wouldn't stand a chance against EV leaders from Asia or even Tesla right here in America. Competing with Tesla, which had already integrated much of its supply chain and locked in global battery partnerships, wasn't going to be easy with Ford's more traditional structure. Lean manufacturing processes, direct-to-consumer sales, and state-of-the-art battery tech had made Tesla the gold standard, leaving automakers like Ford ring to catch up. Ford's statement also highlighted the brand's American roots in a carefully chosen way, touting that the company pioneered mass production and built entire communities around its factories. That spirit, they claimed, was the very reason they had to evolve now. Part of that evolution involved building alliances with foreign battery producers, scouting cheaper labor markets, and setting up new plants that could fast-track the production of EVs. The message: modern progress demands modernization of infrastructure and approach, and that could couldn't happen effectively under the status quo. Suddenly, what looked like a betrayal to some Americans started to appear more nuanced. Was Ford truly abandoning its workforce, or was it orchestrating a careful plan to keep the brand alive well into the 21st century? Trump might have been furious, but Ford wasn't budging, and the stakes continued to rise. As the clash intensified, waves of consequences rippled out, reaching far beyond the automaker's corporate offices. The automotive world is interconnected. Hundreds of suppliers, thousands of subcontractors, and countless small businesses rely on big manufacturers like Ford to stay afloat. When Ford decided to shift part of its electric vehicle production overseas, alarm bells rang out through the entire supply chain. Smaller companies that specialized in providing certain metal parts or electronics faced the possibility of losing contracts. Communities near older Ford factories fretted about potential declines in job prospects and local tax revenues. Meanwhile, rival automakers watched with a mix of concern and fascination. General Motors' Stellantis, the parent of Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge, and others had to consider whether to follow a similar path. Could they afford to keep all EV production on American soil when tariffs and material costs soared? The tension was palpable. If Ford blazed this trail successfully, it might open the door for everyone else to do the same, potentially accelerating the exodus of manufacturing jobs. Tesla, the biggest disruptor in the game, posed its own challenge. Having already pioneered advanced battery technology and established a cult-like consumer following, Tesla was rewriting the rules of automotive success. Where did that leave the old guard? Ford's leadership seemed to believe that going global was the fastest way to narrow the gap, but that choice flew in the face of powerful political narratives demanding companies bring jobs home. As this tug-of-war gained momentum, an even bigger question loomed. Could America maintain its leadership in the auto industry if its own companies started expanding major operations elsewhere? Some saw global expansion as the logical evolution of a shrinking planet. Others viewed it as a dire threat to the foundation of American manufacturing. Either way, the blowback was massive, and it didn't take long for congressional leaders to wade into the fight, and that's where the story took a sharp turn into the political arena, leaving everyone wondering who would take sides and who would pay the price. Within days of the Ford announcement, the debate raged on Capitol Hill. Politicians scrambled to issue statements and align themselves with or against the automaker. Those who backed Trump's America First agenda saw Ford's decision as a direct affront. They called for punitive measures, tariffs on any foreign-made Ford vehicles, elimination of certain tax incentives, and stricter requirements for Made in the USA labeling. On conservative talk shows, pundits framed Ford as yet another corporate giant choosing profits over patriotism. However, not everyone marched in lockstep. Some lawmakers, including a handful of Democrats and moderate Republicans, argued that the problem wasn't Ford's sense of loyalty. It was a flawed domestic policy landscape that made manufacturing prohibitively expensive. They pointed to the lack of robust EV incentives, insufficient infrastructure for charging stations, and the absence of comprehensive policies for securing critical battery materials within America's borders. If the US wanted to stay a global competitor, they argued, it needed a new industrial strategy, not scolding tweets. Lobbyists for the automotive sector amplified this sentiment, cautioning that targeting Ford might scare off investments from other car makers. If the US doubled down on penalties for any company that moved production offshore, it could create an environment too risky for global business that could push more corporations to quietly divert resources to friendlier markets. The fear, they warned, was that the US would isolate itself from a rapidly evolving international economy. Auto unions entered the fray, demanding assurance that American jobs wouldn't vanish. They pressed Ford for commitments. If some production must go abroad, how many EV lines would remain in the US? Would existing factories be retooled for high-tech roles or left to rust? Union leaders recognized the world was changing, but they wanted real guarantees that the backbone of American manufacturing wouldn't be tossed aside in the pursuit of cheaper labor. All this back and forth set the stage for a dramatic legislative showdown. New bills and proposals swirled through committees, some to reward domestic EV production, others to penalize offshoring. The tension in Washington was thick, and it was all because Ford had dared to make a controversial choice in a critical moment of technological upheaval. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Ford was preparing an even more ambitious plan to dominate the electric vehicle future, one that just might justify all the uproar. In the midst of the uproar, Ford quietly rolled out a multi-billion-dollar investment initiative focused on advanced batteries, charging networks, and next-generation EV platforms. It was the clearest sign yet that the automaker wasn't dabbling in electric cars. It was going all in. The money would fund new research centers, strategic partnerships with foreign tech firms, and the transformation of select US facilities into high-tech hubs for design and software development. Yes, a chunk of vehicle assembly would be overseas, but parts of the value chain Ford insisted would remain proudly American. This investment strategy spoke volumes. Ford wasn't merely reacting to Trump, it was taking a hard look at its future in a market where electric vehicles could soon outnumber traditional gas-powered cars. This shift demanded nimble, global operations. Battery technology evolves rapidly, and whoever controls the breakthroughs in efficiency and cost will likely dominate the entire EV segment. By tapping into international resources, Ford hoped to position itself at the cutting edge, possibly outmaneuvering Tesla in the long run. But the political and social shockwaves didn't subside. Several states that had relied on Ford factories for decades felt blindsided. Local politicians in Wayne, Michigan, lamented the loss of certain production lines, warning of economic fallout in regions that had historically supported Ford through thick and thin. Economic development teams scrambled to find ways to keep local facilities relevant, from introducing workforce retraining to courting battery manufacturers who might be enticed to set up shop. Trump, meanwhile, continued his crusade. Amid cheers at packed rallies, he vowed to make Ford an example of what happens when corporations abandon America. The threat of new legislation hung in the air. Economic analysts worried that an escalating standoff could chill the investment climate further, driving other major manufacturers to reconsider expansions in the US. The trade-off was stark: push corporations too hard and risk them leaving. Don't push enough and watch the supply of stable manufacturing jobs dwindle. Even as the drama unfolded, a wave of new EV models appeared on the horizon, from Ford's electric Mustang crossover to pickups that promised to transform the commercial sector. The auto industry was barreling toward an electrified tomorrow, and Ford intended to be in the driver's seat, wherever that seat was assembled. But the twists weren't over. As big business interests united against the threat of punitive measures, an entirely new question arose. Did Trump's efforts to punish Ford actually risk undermining the US economy at large? Trump's loud call for retaliation against Ford made headlines worldwide, but behind that public posture, many business leaders were alarmed. If the administration weaponized tariffs and blocked federal contracts en masse, it could spiral into a larger trade war, sowing chaos across multiple industries. Suddenly, producing goods in America might become even more expensive due to retaliatory moves from overseas markets. Exports could suffer, and foreign competitors would gain an even bigger edge. The stock market, perpetually sensitive to uncertainty, wobbled at the prospect of an all-out feud between Washington and one of the biggest names in the car business. Some investors questioned whether it was time to diversify away from traditional automakers altogether, pouring more money into tech-driven EV startups or focusing on global supply chain players that thrived outside the political fray. Workers, too, faced unsettling choices. Skilled laborers at the heart of Ford's operations wondered if new automation systems and robotics would cut down their hours or render their positions obsolete. Even if Ford kept certain factories in the US, they might run with fewer people, relying more on artificial intelligence for precision tasks. Indeed, the future of auto manufacturing, be it in America or abroad, looks poised to lean heavily on advanced machinery. It wasn't just a Ford issue anymore. If punishing one automaker for going global became standard practice, every industry from aerospace to consumer electronics might find itself caught in the crossfire. US labor laws, environmental regulations, and tariff structures could shift dramatically, perhaps faster than companies could adapt. The dominoes had started falling, and no one could be sure who would be the biggest casualty. Amid all this, Ford's messaging remained consistent. The company had no intention of abandoning America, but needed to maneuver internationally for economic survival. Their leaders projected confidence, believing the short-term controversy would be worth it once Ford secured its place as a leading EV innovator. Whether that faith would pay off, or whether the backlash would forever tarnish Ford's reputation, remained to be seen. Meanwhile, the entire landscape of American cars was transforming. The days of big sedans and humming assembly lines might be coming to a close, and Ford's gamble was part of a much larger story. One thing is clear, the automotive industry that once defined America is undergoing a seismic shift. Gas-guzzling engines, large production crews, and the traditional dealership model are rapidly becoming relics of a bygone age. Today's drivers demand electric propulsion, tech-driven connectivity, and advanced software, everything from over-the-air updates to fully autonomous capabilities. This transformation is rewriting the rules that companies like Ford helped establish. The pressure isn't just domestic. Emerging players overseas, from Chinese electric startups to European luxury EV innovators, are poised to take bigger slices of global market share. The race for the next breakthrough in battery efficiency, charging speed, and vehicle range is more intense than ever. Ford, saddled with legacy operations and union contracts, found itself forced to adapt at breakneck speed or lose the race entirely. Trump's uproar might momentarily rally workers disillusioned by global outsourcing, but it doesn't change the fact that EV technology, supply chains, and consumer tastes are increasingly international. Ford's controversial decision could be a harsh wake-up call for America, reminding everyone that economic walls can't hold back progress if the rest of the world is moving forward. For some, this is an opportunity. Perhaps the US can revamp its own approach to fostering new industries and retaining high-skilled jobs. For others, it's a bitter pill to swallow, as yet another flagship company looks beyond American shores. The auto industry has always been a mirror reflecting the broader economy, showing where innovation, labor, and policy intersect. Ford's move underscores how complicated that intersection has become. It raises questions that extend well beyond the assembly line. Should companies be penalized or encouraged to shift production if it helps them remain globally relevant? Can the government strike a balance between protecting workers and fostering technological leaps? And where will the average American consumer stand when deciding which car to buy in a future dominated by electrification and software-based experiences? After all the speeches, press releases, and protests, the reality remains: the US is no longer the sole epicenter of automotive progress. Ford's gambit to maintain its global edge is both a symptom of this new reality and a catalyst for more change. But what happens if these massive transitions fail to preserve the essence of American manufacturing? That question leads us to the final reckoning of how this saga might shape the entire nation's economic fate. Here we stand at a crossroads, one leading to renewed global dominance for an iconic American automaker, the other pointing to a future where the US might be left behind in the EV revolution. Ford's choice to move production beyond national borders is about far more than cars. It's about a fundamental realignment of industry, technology, and politics. President Trump and his supporters see a betrayal, a turning away from the workers who built Ford into a household name. Corporate leaders argue it's the only path forward if we expect Ford to compete in a fast-changing marketplace. This saga forces us to confront a crucial question. In a globalized world, is it truly possible for an American industrial giant to remain exclusively rooted at home without sacrificing its competitive edge? Or must we accept that the race for EV supremacy demands crossing borders, forging new alliances, and sometimes leaving traditional factories behind? Few events in America's industrial history have rattled the nation quite like Ford's bold new move. It's not just a shift in corporate planning, it's a seismic jolt that has everyone asking if this legendary automaker is betraying its homeland or simply evolving to survive. The whispers began as routine chatter about production lines and supply costs, but soon morphed into something far more explosive. Suddenly, news broke that Ford might uproot significant parts of its manufacturing from Michigan and move them beyond US borders. To some, it felt like a punch in the gut, a betrayal after more than a century of championing the American worker. Others argued it was inevitable if Ford hoped to remain competitive in an era dominated by electric vehicles and global trade wars. Whatever the truth, the fallout has been monumental, sending shockwaves through the halls of Congress, rally arenas, and boardrooms across the country. The question is clear and cuts to the core. Is this the dawn of a new age for Ford, or the end of an era for American manufacturing as we know it? For over 100 years, Ford stood as the proud emblem of American ingenuity and resilience. The brand's heritage is woven into the national identity, conjuring images of bustling factories and hardworking families fueling the growth of a great industrial power. Henry Ford's promise to build cars everyone could afford was more than a business goal. It was a social revolution. That model